The sky over Montana was the color of cold steel when Jack Callahan made the strangest purchase of his life. The courthouse in Flathead County smelled of damp wool, old paper, and the faint bitterness of half-cold coffee. He sat near the back of the room, quiet, broad-shouldered, posture straight from 2 decades in the Army. The auctioneer's voice droned through a list of forgotten properties and seized assets, but Jack's attention stayed on the rain-streaked window. Beside his boots lay Ghost, his 9-year-old German shepherd, a calm, watchful shadow whose silver-gray fur gleamed faintly in the gray light. The dog's eyes, amber and knowing, followed every small movement in the room. When the auctioneer finally reached Parcel 7B, known locally as the Old Miller Place, the air changed. Conversations hushed, glances shifted toward the stranger in the back row. The auctioneer sighed as if even naming the property was a burden. 160 acres, single cabin, condition poor, one well, status unknown. Property sold as is. His glasses slid down his nose, and his tone dropped to a resigned drawl. "We'll start at $500. Jack raised his hand. "400. A ripple went through the room. The auctioneer blinked. "400's below the opening bid, sir." Jack didn't lower his hand. "You'll take it." The man hesitated, then gave a half shrug. "All right, 400 then. Do I hear 5? No one moved. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The farmers in worn denim stared at Jack with pity. The local speculators looked away as if not to be associated. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a tired crack. "Sold to the gentleman in the back for $400. The sound echoed through the chamber like a rifle shot. Jack stood, slid his worn wallet from his pocket, and walked to the front. As he signed the papers, the clerk avoided his eyes, pushing the deed toward him as if it were tainted. Behind him, whispers stirred. Words like cursed, haunted, foolish. Ghost followed, his claws clicking softly on the wood floor. Jack took the folded deed, slipped it into his flannel shirt pocket, and stepped out into the chill afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining and slick. He knelt beside his dog, rubbed the coarse fur between his ears, and whispered, "Well, partner, looks like we bought ourselves a project." Ghost's tail thumped once against the wet pavement. The town was small, a scattering of weathered buildings pressed between forested ridges and empty sky. Jack stopped at the only general store, Abernathy's, its paint peeling, windows fogged from the stove inside. The bell over the door jingled as he entered. The warmth smelled of sawdust, leather, and freshly ground coffee. Behind the counter, an old man in a canvas apron looked up, eyes sharp under bushy brows. "Afternoon. What can I get for you?" Jack took a folded list from his pocket. "Padlock, lamp oil, coffee, new axe handle if you've got one." Abernathy moved slowly but with practiced ease, collecting the items. "You're not from around here." "Just moved," Jack said. "Bought a bit of property north of town." The man stopped, hand hovering over the coffee tin. "Would that bit of property happen to be the Miller place?" Jack nodded once. The shopkeeper exhaled, long and low. "Son, I hope you don't mind an old man talking plain. That land's trouble." Jack met his gaze, expression unreadable. "Go ahead." Abernathy leaned against the counter, voice dropping. "Arthur Miller was a journalist. Moved here 16 years ago, asking too many questions about the mines. Sharp fella, polite, kept to himself. Then one day he just vanished. His truck was still there, food on the table. County tied the land up in taxes for 15 years. Every so often some corporation tried to grab it, but our laws wouldn't let them, so it sat, rotting. Folks started saying it's haunted. Some say Miller's ghost walks those woods, looking for justice. That's why no one bid against you today. They think the place is cursed." Jack slid the bills across the counter. "I appreciate the warning." The old man studied him a moment, then nodded. "Good luck to you, soldier." The drive out of town took him along a narrow strip of road that wound through valleys turning gold with autumn. The farther he went, the more civilization fell away. Asphalt gave to gravel, gravel to dirt. The afternoon light thinned, soft and amber through the pines. Jack's truck rattled over ruts, its engine a steady, comforting growl. Ghost sat upright in the passenger seat, nose twitching, reading the new world through scent and sound. When they passed the rusted sign that marked the boundary of the Miller property, Jack slowed. The fence was collapsed, the gate hanging open on one hinge. He turned in carefully, headlights cutting through the early mist. The track narrowed to twin grooves carved deep into earth. Branches clawed at the truck's sides. After a mile, a fallen pine forced him to steer sharply through a ditch. The move felt intentional, as if someone had arranged the obstacles to discourage visitors. Ghost growled softly. "I see it too," Jack murmured. Another bend and the trees opened into a clearing. The cabin waited there, small and square, half swallowed by weeds. Its roof sagged, porch tilted, but the logs still held firm. The chimney rose thick and dark, slick with moss. Jack parked and cut the engine. The silence that followed was immense. He stepped out, boots sinking into damp leaves. The air was sharp with pine and distant rain. Ghost leapt down beside him, nose to the ground, tail still. Jack took a long look at the place, at the warped boards, the shutter hanging by one hinge, and felt a strange calm settle in his chest. "Home," he said quietly. Ghost gave a soft wuff, as if agreeing. The porch groaned under Jack's weight when he climbed it. The door creaked open on rusted hinges, letting out a breath of stale air that smelled of dust, mice, and old smoke. Inside, the single room was dim. Sunlight pressed weakly through dirty windows, illuminating floating dust. Against one wall stood a narrow bed frame, its springs bare. In the corner, a table held a chipped mug and a book left open face down, pages curled as if someone had only just stepped away. A heavy wool coat still hung on a peg near the door, pocket bulging. The silence felt thick, watchful. Jack moved slowly through the room, the wooden floor flexing under his boots. He could almost feel the ghost of Arthur Miller moving around him, a man who had fought quietly until the day he disappeared. Ghost sniffed each corner, tail low, movements precise. Then the dog froze, body stiff, eyes fixed on the fireplace that dominated the far wall. He let out a low whine that rose into a soft bark, sharp and questioning. "What is it, boy?" Jack knelt, running his hand over the rough stones. The hearth was cold, ashes long dead, but something in the arrangement caught his attention. The central stone at the base looked smoother, darker than the rest. Ghost pawed at it, claws clicking against the slate, whining again. Jack felt the first flicker of unease, the instinct honed by years of reading subtle warnings. He pressed his palm flat against the stone. It was colder than it should have been, as if something beneath it drew heat away. The last of the daylight slipped through the windows, painting the interior golden shadow. Jack straightened, brushing dust from his jeans. "Tomorrow," he told the dog. "We'll look tomorrow." Outside, the sky was deepening toward indigo. He locked the door, hung the new padlock on the hasp, and sat on the porch steps while Ghost settled at his feet. The forest whispered around them, branches moving in the slow conversation. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled. He pulled his coat tighter and watched the clouds gather over the mountains. He hadn't come here for mystery or ghosts. He had come for quiet. Yet already the land hummed with something else. Memory, maybe, or warning. Ghost lifted his head, ears pricking, eyes glowing faintly in the twilight. Jack reached down and scratched behind them. "We'll be fine," he said softly, but the words carried no conviction. The wind answered with a low sigh, and somewhere beyond the trees, a shutter banged once, hollow and distant, like the heartbeat of an empty house waiting to speak. By morning, the sky was a solid sheet of gray, the air heavy with the promise of snow. Jack woke in his truck, stiff from the cold and the awkward position of sleeping in the driver's seat. Ghost was already awake, sitting upright in the passenger side, watching the fog swirl across the clearing. The wind whistled low through the pines, and a distant crow called once before silence reclaimed the land. Jack rubbed the sleep from his eyes, reached for the thermos of lukewarm coffee on the dashboard, and took a slow sip. The first bitter swallow grounded him. "Let's get to work, partner." he said quietly. Ghost wagged his tail once, as if he understood that something was about to begin. They moved supplies into the cabin. Blankets, a sleeping bag, tools, a small crate of canned food, and a jug of clean water. Each step inside stirred up faint motes of dust that shimmered in the pale morning light. The silence pressed close, thick but not unfriendly. It was the silence of a place waiting to remember its story. Jack unpacked methodically, as if order itself could make the cabin warmer. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots, a low rhythmic groan that echoed faintly under the house. Ghost's ears flicked toward the sound every time. By noon, the first flakes began to fall, fat and slow, drifting from a sky that seemed to lower itself closer to the earth. The world dimmed. Jack stood at the single window, watching as snow gathered on the truck, the porch, the fallen fence beyond. Ghost paced restlessly, his claws ticking against the wood. "We'll light a fire," Jack muttered. He checked the hearth, cleared out the cold ashes, and stacked new kindling. The flue was open, the draw steady. When he struck the match, the fire caught with a sigh, orange light spilling over the walls. The warmth should have eased the dog's nerves, but instead Ghost backed away from the hearth, tail low, eyes fixed on the base of the fireplace. His breath came fast, nose twitching. "Easy, boy." Jack crouched beside him. Ghost's muscles were tense as wire. He took a few hesitant steps forward, sniffed the cracks between the stones, then began to scratch again, claws scraping uselessly against the hearth. The sound was sharp in the quiet. "What are you trying to tell me?" Jack whispered. Ghost stopped, turned his head slightly, and let out a low, urgent whine that made the hairs rise on Jack's arms. He looked at the stone again, that same darker slab at the center of the base. The edges looked too clean, the seams too deliberate. Kneeling, he brushed away a layer of ash and dirt, revealing a faint line of hardened black material. Not mortar, but something slicker. Pitch, maybe, or tar. Jack's instincts hummed. He had spent years learning to notice what others missed. He rose, went to his tool bag, and pulled out his utility knife. The blade bit easily into the edge of the seam. The material gave with a soft, gummy resistance. Not stonework. A seal. Someone had sealed this stone deliberately. Ghost stood beside him, silent now but vibrating with alertness, as if waiting for the confirmation of something he already knew. "All right," Jack said quietly. "Let's see what you found." He fetched his crowbar, wedged it into the small gap he'd created, and pressed down. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the stone groaned, a long, deep sound like an exhale from the earth itself. He worked his weight against it, muscles straining. The slab shifted slightly, then lifted. Cold, stale air puffed out, smelling faintly of dust and something metallic. Jack froze, lantern light trembling in his grip. Beneath the slab was a narrow rectangular hole about 4 feet deep, lined with rough-cut boards. He lowered the lantern carefully. The glow revealed a metal box, olive green, the kind the Army used for ammunition, and beside it, a stack of leather-bound notebooks tied neatly with twine. The air down there felt different, preserved, untouched by time. Ghost peered over the edge, his nose twitching, then relaxed, his body easing into a calmer stance. Whatever he had sensed, it was now in the open. Jack reached in, fingers brushing cold metal. He hauled the box out, muscles tightening under the weight, then the journals. He set them both on the table, heart thudding. The box's latch was stiff with rust. He pried it open, half expecting nothing but mold or old tools. Instead, it was full of small glass vials, each carefully labeled with a date and coordinates. Beneath them were lab reports stamped with the name of a private testing facility in Bozeman. He recognized the numbers: arsenic, lead, industrial solvents, toxic levels. His breath caught. He set the vials down carefully and opened one of the notebooks. The first page was dated 2008. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, a journalist's hand. "They're trying to force me off my land," it read. "Fines for things that don't exist. Complaints filed by ghosts. Every time I appeal, another inspection appears. It's coordinated." The next lines made Jack's jaw tighten. "Geocorp is dumping waste in the creeks. I have proof, but they're watching me. If this journal is found, it means they finally succeeded. Jack exhaled slowly. Ghost rested his head on his knee, watching. Good work, partner, Jack whispered. You found the truth. The fire crackled behind them, its warmth struggling against the draft that crept through the old walls. Outside, the storm intensified. The wind pressed against the windows like a living thing. Jack closed the notebook gently, his mind racing. If Miller had documented illegal dumping, Geocorp had a motive for silence. And if the company had kept others away from this cabin for 15 years, that meant the danger hadn't died with the man who wrote these pages. The knock came just after dusk. A single heavy rap against the wooden door, muffled by the wind but unmistakable. Ghost's head shot up, ears forward, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Jack's hand went to the pistol holstered under his coat. "Who's there?" he called. The answer came in a deep, easy drawl. "Sheriff Riggs." "Evening, Mr. Callahan. Everything all right out here?" Jack hesitated, then unlatched the door but kept it half closed. The man outside was large, shoulders filling his tan coat, badge glinting faintly in the lamplight. Snow clung to his boots. "Heard about the sale," the sheriff said. "Thought I'd check in on the new owner." "Weather's turning nasty." Jack studied him, noting the way the man's eyes moved. Not meeting his, but sweeping the room, the fireplace, the table. "Appreciate it, Sheriff. I'm managing fine." Riggs nodded slowly, stepping inside uninvited to warm his hands by the fire. "This place has a history," he said, rubbing his palms together. "You hear the stories?" Jack didn't answer. The sheriff smiled thinly. "Folks say it's cursed. Personally, I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe some things are better left buried." His tone sharpened just enough for the message to land. Jack kept his face neutral. "I like peace and quiet. That's all I came for." Riggs nodded again, eyes still wandering. "Then I hope you find it." He moved to the door. "Storm's gonna hit hard tonight. Best stay indoors. Roads will be impassable by morning." When his truck's taillights vanished into the white, Jack bolted the door and checked his supplies. Something in the sheriff's manner gnawed at him. He walked outside to the truck, the snow already knee-deep, wind tearing at his coat. Ghost followed, pressing close. Jack crouched to inspect the tires. The right rear had a clean slice along the sidewall. Not torn, but cut, deliberate and precise. He touched the edge of the cut, cold rubber stiff under his fingers. The sheriff's visit had been no courtesy call. It had been a warning. He returned inside, brushed snow from his shoulders, and sat beside the fire. Ghost lay near the hearth again, silent but alert. The wind howled, shaking the cabin, and the old logs groaned. Jack stared into the flames, replaying the sheriff's words in his head. Something had been hidden here, something worth killing for. And now that he'd found it, the people responsible knew he existed. He reached down to scratch the dog's neck, feeling the warm pulse under his fingers. "Looks like we've walked into another kind of battlefield, partner," he said quietly. Ghost's amber eyes reflected the firelight, steady and unafraid. The storm rose outside, fierce and unrelenting, sealing them in with the truth they had unearthed. By midnight, the storm had swallowed the world whole. The wind screamed through the pines like a living thing, rattling the old cabin until its bones groaned in protest. Jack sat at the small wooden table, staring at the flickering lantern flame as it struggled against the cold drafts that slipped through the gaps in the walls. Ghost lay nearby, his silver-gray fur catching the firelight in shifting tones of golden shadow. The dog wasn't sleeping. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, every gust of wind pulling a low growl from his throat. Jack's mind was restless. The discovery under the fireplace, those journals and vials, had changed everything. They weren't just relics of the past. They were proof. Proof of a cover-up, of a company poisoning the land and silencing anyone who tried to expose it. Arthur Miller had died for what he uncovered, and now Jack had inherited that same danger. The thought settled over him like another layer of frost. He glanced down at Ghost. "They know we're here," he said quietly. The dog's ears twitched. We can't run blind. Not yet. At dawn, the blizzard was still raging, but the storm's fury had dulled into a heavy, relentless fall. Jack decided to use the daylight while he had it. He layered up, strapped on his boots, and pushed open the door. The snow was waist-deep in places, the wind biting at his face. Ghost bounded ahead, moving through the drifts like a silver phantom. Jack followed the edge of his property, memorizing the paths and landmarks. Every few steps, Ghost would stop, nose to the wind, then continue forward. The world was silent except for the crunch of boots and paws. At the edge of the clearing, Jack found something that made him stop cold. Tire tracks, fresh ones. They led up to a small rise near the tree line, then turned back toward the main road. The snowfall hadn't covered them completely, meaning whoever had been here had come during the night, after the sheriff left. Jack crouched, brushing snow from the grooves. Heavy treads. Truck, not car. His jaw tightened. He scanned the tree line and saw nothing but the still white of the woods. But Ghost's ears perked and his body stiffened. The dog let out a low rumble, his breath steaming in the cold. They were being watched. Jack turned back toward the cabin, his movements careful but quick. Inside, he bolted the door and stood by the fire thinking. He'd seen too many situations like this overseas. Silent warnings, small movements before the storm. He didn't have time to wait for them to make the next move. He needed help. Not local help, real help. He knelt, pulled out one of the notebooks, and read through more of Miller's entries. They detailed everything. Fake inspectors, land seizures, missing shipments of barrels marked mining waste, and names, county officials, contractors, and a company executive whose name made Jack pause, Silas Blackwood. That afternoon, the snow eased, and for a brief hour, sunlight spilled weakly through the clouds. Jack used the moment to prepare. He gathered the most important pieces of evidence, one of the notebooks, several vials, and the water sample reports. Then he went out to his truck, scraped off the ice from the windshield, and tested the patched tire. It would hold for now. Ghost sat in the passenger seat, head high, watching him. "We're going into town," Jack said. "Quick and quiet." The drive to Abernathy's general store was slow, the dirt road now buried beneath thick snow. When they arrived, the bell above the door chimed softly as Jack stepped in, shaking off the cold. Abernathy looked up from behind the counter, his face lighting with recognition, and then dimming when he saw Jack's expression. "Morning, son," the old man said. "You look like you didn't sleep." "Long night," Jack said. "You ever hear the name Silas Blackwood?" Abernathy froze mid-motion, the rag in his hand going still. "Why do you ask?" "Because he's the one who wanted the Miller land," Jack said evenly, "and I think he's still trying to get it." The old man sighed, leaning against the counter. "That man's got his hands in everything that shines. Owns half the mines in the valley. If he wants something, he gets it. You'd best not cross him, Jack. Men who do tend to disappear." Jack nodded slowly. "I appreciate the warning, but I'm not the disappearing kind." He gathered his supplies, extra food, a roll of tape, and a spare flashlight, and left without another word. The sun was sinking behind the mountains when Jack returned to the cabin. Ghost jumped out first, sniffing the air, tail stiff. The wind had gone still, unnaturally so. Jack's eyes swept the area. Nothing seemed disturbed, but his gut told him otherwise. He unlocked the door, entered, and stopped cold. The fireplace tools were scattered. The notebook he'd left on the table was gone. Someone had been inside. His pulse quickened. Ghost moved in a slow circle, sniffing the ground. His fur bristled near the window. Jack crouched beside him and found the faint imprint of a boot in the dust. Wet, melting snow pooled inside it. It hadn't been long. He scanned the room again, then checked the hearth. The slab he had pried open was untouched, but the ash he'd scattered to hide it was slightly disturbed. Whoever came inside had been searching, not stealing. He turned off the lantern, plunging the cabin into dim light. He stood still, listening. Outside, the forest was silent, too silent. Ghost's tail twitched once. The dog's body went rigid, nose pointing toward the window. Jack moved closer and peered through a small gap in the curtain. At first he saw nothing. Then a faint glint, a metallic reflection. Binoculars. Someone was watching from the trees. Jack exhaled slowly and drew back. "They're close," he whispered. He reached for his bag, pulling out a portable radio, an old relic from his service days. The static hissed as he turned it on. He tuned to the emergency frequency. "Mark Jensen," he said under his breath, remembering the only man he still trusted. Mark was an investigative journalist now, the kind who went after men like Blackwood. Jack couldn't risk calling him yet, not with the storm still interfering with the signal. But he could prepare. That night he didn't sleep. He sat by the dying fire, rifle across his lap, listening to the wind crawl around the cabin like a predator. Ghost stayed close, his head resting on Jack's boot, but his body never fully relaxed. At one point in the early hours, Jack thought he heard something, footsteps crunching faintly in the snow outside, circling, stopping. He froze, every sense sharpening. The sound faded, then vanished completely. When dawn came, it was thin and pale. The storm had finally passed, leaving the world buried under a blanket of white so bright it hurt to look at. Jack stood at the door, staring at the woods. He couldn't see footprints from where he stood, but he knew they were there. Somewhere beyond those trees, someone was waiting for him to make a mistake. He turned back inside, feeling the weight of the journals and the truth they carried. This wasn't just about a cabin or a company anymore. It was about something bigger. Miller had died trying to protect the truth. Now it was his turn to finish what the man started. Jack looked down at Ghost, whose amber eyes were locked on him, alert and ready. "We're not running," he said quietly. "Not yet." He walked to the table, laid out the maps and vials, and started marking the coordinates one by one. Ghost sat beside him, silent as a shadow, the faint crackle of the fire the only sound in the room. The storm was over, but the real danger, the kind that walked on two legs, was just beginning. The next morning brought no relief, only a gray sky heavy with new snow, and a silence so deep it pressed on Jack's chest like weight. Inside the cabin, the embers in the fireplace had cooled to ash, but Ghost remained awake, sitting by the door, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. Jack moved quietly, his breath visible in the cold air. He made coffee on a portable burner, the bitter smell mixing with the scent of damp wood. His thoughts churned between fragments of Arthur Miller's journals and the fresh boot prints he'd found. The enemy wasn't just the weather, it was people who wanted this place forgotten. The truth under his floor was the kind that powerful men buried with fear and money. He went outside, his boots sinking deep into the snow. The air was sharp, the world colorless except for the faint gold tint of dawn. He walked toward the road, studying the frozen ruts of the mysterious truck tires again. This time he noticed something else. Faint imprints beside them, smaller, lighter. Two sets of footprints, not one. Whoever had come had brought someone else. He crouched and traced the prints with a gloved finger. One stride was longer, heavier. The other was shorter, uneven, as if the person limped. That detail lodged itself in his mind. When he returned to the cabin, Ghost was waiting at the window, ears pricked. "You smell them, don't you?" Jack said. The dog's only response was a quiet, rumbling growl. Jack fed the fire, watching the flames take hold, and then unrolled the maps again. Each red circle from Miller's notes represented contamination points. Springs and creeks poisoned years ago by Geocorp's waste dumping. He could see the pattern clearly now. The cabin sat right at the center of it all, the hub of a ring of damage hidden beneath rural obscurity. He needed to get the information to someone trustworthy, but that would take time. He couldn't use his phone. It was too easy to track. So he decided to use what he knew best: caution and redundancy. In the afternoon, he opened one of the notebooks and began copying the key details by hand onto clean pages. Coordinates, chemical readings, names, dates. Ghost dozed near the fire, but his tail flicked at every creak and gust. The air felt charged, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. Near dusk, as the light thinned, The sound of an engine cut through the quiet. Not the sheriff's rumbling old SUV. This was smoother, newer, and too close. Jack moved to the window and peeled back a corner of the curtain. A black truck rolled into view, sleek, expensive, spotless despite the snow. The engine idled as the driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a clean wool coat and polished boots that gleamed even in the dull light. He didn't belong here. The man smiled when he saw Jack at the window, then lifted a gloved hand in greeting before striding toward the porch. Ghost growled low and deep. Jack unlatched the door, but didn't open it fully. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Callahan," the man said, voice smooth, his breath curling like smoke in the air. "Silas Blackwood. I believe we have mutual interests." Jack said nothing. Blackwood's gaze swept over the cabin, its rough timbers, the patched window, the faint scent of smoke. "I represent GeoCorp. We've been trying to acquire this property for some time. I hear you bought it for $400? He chuckled softly. "Quite a bargain." Jack's jaw tightened. "It's not for sale." Blackwood's smile didn't waver. "Everything is for sale, Mr. Callahan, especially things that come with trouble. I'm offering you $50,000 in cash. Today. That's more than fair for a forgotten patch of land." "I said it's not for sale." The older man studied him, the warmth fading from his expression. "You're a military man. You understand lines of command. I'm telling you this as a courtesy. Walk away while you can. This land is under corporate interest. It's not safe to keep it." Jack met his eyes steadily. "Then I'll take my chances." Blackwood exhaled through his nose, his smile gone. "You'll regret that," he said softly. "You and your dog." He turned, walked back to his truck, and climbed inside. As he drove away, his tires cut deep grooves in the snow like scars across the land. Jack stood on the porch long after the sound of the engine faded. The cold gnawed through his coat, but he barely noticed. "We've stirred up the hornet's nest," he murmured. Ghost pressed against his leg, the dog's body warm and solid against the growing wind. When night fell, Jack packed a small duffel bag with food, water, and a few of the copied notes. He sat at the table, pulled out an old portable scanner, and began uploading the evidence to a secure drive. His hands were steady, methodical. When it was done, he pulled a burner phone from a sealed pouch, a leftover from another life, and powered it on. The signal was weak but stable. He entered an encrypted address and attached the files, labeling the message with one word: proof. The recipient's name was Mark Jensen, a journalist he'd served with years ago, one of the few men he trusted. He hit send. The upload bar crawled forward slowly. Every creak of the walls, every sigh of wind made his pulse quicken. Then finally sent. He turned the phone off, removed the battery, and tossed both pieces into separate corners of the room. "Now we wait," he said. Ghost lifted his head, ears twitching. But the waiting didn't last long. Just after midnight, Ghost growled again, low and unbroken. Jack grabbed his rifle, moved to the side of the window, and peered through the narrow gap. Headlights, a single pair creeping along the trail. They stopped at the clearing's edge, then turned off. The engine cut. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Jack crouched, the rifle steady in his hands. Ghost was at his side, every muscle tense. Then, a faint crunch of snow. Footsteps, more than one set. They were coming closer. Jack motioned to Ghost to stay. He waited, breath held. The door rattled once softly like a polite knock. Then came the metallic scrape of a lockpick. In one fluid motion, Jack kicked over the lantern, plunging the room into near darkness. The door creaked open a sliver. A gloved hand reached through. Ghost exploded into motion, a blur of fur and muscle. His snarl shattered the silence. The intruder cursed, stumbling backward as Jack fired once. Just above the man's shoulder, the muzzle flash lighting the cabin for a heartbeat. The figure fled into the snow, shouting something to a second man waiting outside. Jack bolted the door again and braced it with a heavy beam. Ghost returned to his side, panting but unhurt, eyes glowing in the firelight. For several minutes they listened to the retreating crunch of boots. Then, only the wind remained. Jack crouched, hand on the dog's back. "Good boy," he whispered. "You just saved us both." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, covering every footprint as if the world itself wanted to hide what had just happened. Inside, the fire burned low, the air heavy with smoke and tension. Jack knew this was no longer about curiosity or inheritance. It was a war, a quiet, hidden war, and he and Ghost were standing in the center of it. He leaned back against the wall, exhaustion weighing down his limbs. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "we finish what Miller started." Ghost pressed closer, his steady breathing the only sound as the storm returned, howling like a beast that refused to rest. By dawn, the storm had eased into a fragile calm. The world outside glowed with a harsh, cold beauty. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, the trees heavy with frost. Jack stepped outside, rifle in hand, scanning the tree line. The footprints from last night were gone, erased by wind and ice. It was as if the intruders had never been there. But he knew better. He'd seen the man's shadow, heard his voice. They'd be back, and next time they wouldn't come quietly. Inside, Ghost was pacing. The dog's instincts were sharp. He felt the tension before Jack even moved. Jack crouched, rubbing Ghost's ears. "We've got one chance, boy," he murmured. "If they want what's under that floor, we make sure someone else knows it exists." He worked quickly. The small evidence pack he'd sent last night wasn't enough. He had to prepare for the worst. If he didn't survive, the truth had to. He gathered the journals, lab reports, and map, then divided them into two piles. One stayed hidden in the cellar, sealed again under the hearthstone. The other he copied onto waterproof pages, sliding them into a heavy plastic pouch. Ghost sat close, watching every move. Jack checked the time. Barely after 8. He had to move before they regrouped. He dressed in his heaviest coat, tucked the evidence pouch under his arm, and opened the door. The air outside was painfully cold, cutting into his lungs. The sky was iron gray, clouds piling again on the horizon. Another storm was coming. He locked the cabin behind him and headed toward the truck. They reached the main road after an hour of slow, grinding progress. The tires slipped in the snow, but the engine held steady. As they descended the valley, the forest gave way to open land and distant signs of life. Telephone poles, the faint glint of metal roofs far away. Jack kept checking his mirrors, every flicker of motion making his pulse spike. But the road behind him stayed empty. In Kalispell, he parked several blocks away from the center of town. He needed to vanish in plain sight. First stop, a small electronics store near the bus terminal. He paid cash for a cheap prepaid phone and an SD card. Then he crossed to the public library. Inside, the warmth was disorienting. The smell of books and carpet cleaner hit him like nostalgia from a world he'd almost forgotten. He took a computer station in the back, Ghost lying silently under the table, head resting on his paws. Jack connected the SD card and began scanning. One by one, he uploaded the most important files: Miller's journal pages, the water reports, the map with coordinates. The library connection was slow, the progress bar crawling across the screen. He kept glancing at the door, half expecting someone to burst in. When the upload was done, he encrypted the file with a password only one person would know: the name of a mountain ridge where he and Mark Jensen had almost died 2 decades ago. Then he sent it to Mark's private address. When it was finished, he logged out, wiped the computer history, and sat back, his pulse still pounding. Ghost nudged his knee, sensing the adrenaline. "That's it," Jack whispered. "It's out there now. Even if we go down, the truth won't." He used the new phone to make a call. The line clicked. Then a familiar voice answered. "Jensen." "It's Jack," he said quietly. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "Jack? Jesus, it's been years. Where are you calling from?" "Montana," Jack said. "I'm sitting on something bad, Mark." "Real bad. A missing journalist named Arthur Miller, corporate poisoning cover-up, maybe murder. I sent you everything. If you don't hear from me by 0600 tomorrow, you take it to the FBI. Not local. Federal. Got it?" Mark's voice dropped low. Are you in danger? Yes, Jack said simply. They already tried once. Then get out of there. I can't. Not yet. There's more evidence hidden under the cabin. Jack, listen. But Jack was already hanging up. He powered off the phone, removed the battery, and tossed both parts into a trash can outside the library. The less trace, the better. They left town before noon, heading north through the back roads. Ghost sat silently in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Snow began to fall again, soft at first, then thicker, swirling in the wind. Jack gripped the wheel tighter. The sky was darkening fast. By the time they reached the cabin, night had already fallen. The wind was picking up, howling through the pines. Jack parked behind a drift to hide the truck from view and carried the essentials inside. Rifle, flashlight, food, and the thermos of coffee he'd bought in town. Then he braced the door and windows, reinforced the hinges, and placed the heavy table across the entrance. The storm came down like a hammer. Snow lashed against the cabin, thunder rolling in the distance. Ghost circled restlessly, his instincts screaming. Jack sat by the fire, rifle across his lap, eyes on the door. He could feel it. This wasn't nature's fury anymore. It was cover. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of an engine beneath the wind. Not distant, close. A vehicle pushing through snowdrifts. Jack moved to the window and lifted the edge of the blanket. Headlights flickered through the trees, then disappeared. The engine stopped. He turned off the lantern, plunging the cabin into darkness. "Stay low," he whispered to Ghost. The dog obeyed instantly, crouching near the hearth, his body rigid. The only light came from the fire, its glow pulsing weakly against the log walls. Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow. One set, then another. They stopped just beyond the door. A pause, a faint metallic sound, the slide of a weapon being readied. Jack raised the rifle, aiming at the door's hinge. The silence stretched. Then, without warning, a sharp crash. Something slammed against the door. Once, twice. A third blow shattered the wooden beam across it. The door burst open, snow whipping in, and a shadow filled the frame. Ghost lunged, a blur of muscle and teeth, slamming into the intruder's legs. The man fell with a grunt, his pistol skittering across the floor. Jack fired a warning shot into the wall above him. "Don't move!" he shouted. The man groaned, clutching his arm, blood dark against the snow now spilling inside. But there was no time. Another shadow appeared behind him, then another, 3 of them total. Jack backed up, firing a second shot toward the doorway. The figures scattered, retreating into the storm. Ghost snarled, chest heaving, ready to chase. Jack slammed the door shut again, wedged a fallen beam against it, and crouched beside the fire. His pulse hammered in his ears. Outside, the storm drowned everything. But between the gusts, he could hear voices, faint and angry. "They'll come again," he whispered to Ghost. "Next time, they won't knock." The firelight danced across the dog's face, his amber eyes glowing like embers. Jack reached for his coat, reloading the rifle. "We hold this place," he said, "until morning. Then we finish this." Outside, the storm raged, a white wall hiding every sound and every shape. But Jack knew. They weren't gone. They were waiting in the snow, patient and ruthless. And as the wind howled through the trees, Ghost pressed closer, his growl a low, steady drum beneath the storm's roar. The wind howled like a wounded beast, clawing at the cabin walls until they creaked in protest. Jack sat with his back to the door, rifle ready, every sense alive. The storm had grown into something monstrous, sheets of snow slamming sideways, air so thick it blurred even the firelight inside. The world outside had vanished, swallowed by the white. But Jack knew they were still out there, waiting. Ghost stood near the hearth, his fur bristling, nose twitching toward the back wall. Every few seconds, he let out a low growl, deep and steady. Jack followed his gaze to the small rear window, frozen over, but not unbreakable. "They'll try from behind," he murmured. He moved silently across the floor, dragging the heavy wooden table toward the back wall, creating a makeshift barricade. Then he taped a wool blanket over the glass to block any view inside. The fire popped, sending sparks across the hearth. Ghost flinched but didn't move from his post. Outside, the storm masked the faint crunch of footsteps. Then suddenly, a sharp metallic sound cut through the wind. A click, the sound of a latch being tested. Jack aimed his rifle toward the back window, finger light on the trigger. The next second, the old glass shattered inward, scattering icy shards across the floor. He fired once. The muzzle flash illuminated the room for an instant, enough to reveal a dark figure crouched in the snow outside. The shot missed intentionally, close enough to scare, not to kill. A curse echoed from beyond the wall, then silence. Ghost barked once, the sound fierce and echoing. Jack exhaled slowly, forcing his heartbeat down. They were testing him, probing, not yet committing, but it was only a matter of time before they came full force. He crouched beside Ghost, his voice barely audible. "You hold this line, partner. Nobody gets through that door." Ghost's tail flicked once, the only acknowledgement he needed. Minutes dragged like hours. The storm raged, then eased, then raged again. Jack's mind replayed every sound, every shadow. He thought about Miller, about the lonely man who had once sat in the same room, surrounded by danger, holding on to the truth that no one wanted to hear. Jack understood him now. The silence, the isolation, the creeping sense that you were fighting something too big to win, but fighting anyway, because it was right. The next assault came without warning. A heavy impact rattled the front door, followed by a second and a third. They were ramming it with something, maybe a log, maybe the butt of a rifle. The hinges screamed, but held. Jack crouched low, sighting down the barrel toward the doorframe. Ghost was already in position, body low to the ground, his growl a vibrating hum in the air. Another crash! The top hinge tore loose with a metallic shriek. A gloved hand reached through the crack in the wood. Jack didn't hesitate. He kicked the door with all his strength, slamming it back against the frame and crushing the intruder's arm between wood and steel. A muffled cry erupted, followed by retreating footsteps. Jack bolted the door again, then heard it, the hiss of liquid splattering against the wall. Lantern oil. His stomach dropped. "They're going to burn us out," he muttered. Ghost whined, anxious, circling. "We have to move." He grabbed his coat and the pouch of evidence, shoving it inside his shirt. Then he went to the hearth and pulled the crowbar free. The slab he'd sealed earlier was still there, the dark edges faintly visible under ash. He jammed the crowbar into the seam, prying with all his strength until the stone shifted and lifted. Beneath, the small cellar waited, dark, narrow, but deep enough to shield them for a few minutes. The smell of fuel grew stronger. Jack heard the scrape of a match striking, then the roar of fire catching dry timber. Flames burst through the gaps near the door, licking up the wall in hungry orange tongues. The heat hit fast, searing. Smoke billowed across the ceiling. "Down, Ghost!" Jack shouted. The dog obeyed instantly, jumping into the cellar first. Jack followed, dragging the stone slab halfway over the opening. The world above turned into chaos. Wood cracking, glass shattering, fire roaring as the cabin transformed into an inferno. Jack crouched low, covering his face with his arm, feeling the air turn hot and thin. Ghost pressed against him, trembling but silent. Then came the voices above, shouting. Someone barked orders, angry, panicked. "It's spreading too fast," another yelled. "Forget it, pull back." Boots pounded against the floorboards, then vanished. The fire screamed louder, consuming everything. Jack could barely breathe. The heat was unbearable, smoke seeping into their hiding place. They couldn't stay. He pushed the slab aside, coughing as he pulled himself up into a world of orange light and choking air. The roof was collapsing, beams falling like fiery spears. "Come on, boy," he gasped. Ghost leapt out beside him, and together they ran for the door. Jack kicked it open, half-burned, the hinges glowing red, and plunged into the snow. The shock of cold hit him like a wall. Behind them, the cabin blazed like a dying sun, flames roaring against the dark sky. Jack stumbled through the drifts, lungs burning, the rifle still slung across his shoulder. Ghost bounded ahead, then stopped suddenly, barking furiously. Jack looked up and froze. Through the haze of smoke and snow, 3 figures stood at the edge of the clearing. One held a pistol, another a rifle, the third standing tall and still. The man in front stepped forward, the firelight revealing his face. Silas Blackwood. His eyes burned with fury. "You should have taken the money, Callahan," he shouted over the wind. "Now look at you. The cabin's gone. The proof's gone. And soon so are you." Jack raised his rifle. "The proof isn't gone," he said evenly. "And you know it," Blackwood sneered. "Then I'll make sure it burns with you." He raised his pistol. But before he could fire, the air filled with a new sound. A deep, rhythmic thump, 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 growing louder with every beat. Helicopters. Jack turned his head just as bright searchlights cut through the storm, blinding in white. One helicopter was marked with the insignia of the Montana State Police. The other bore no symbols at all, just matte black metal and federal precision. A booming voice crackled through loudspeakers. "This is the FBI. Drop your weapons. You are surrounded." Blackwood froze, his pistol still raised, but his face drained of color. His men hesitated, then dropped their rifles into the snow. The light caught their eyes, the storm swirling around them like judgment itself. Jack lowered his rifle, exhaustion washing over him. Ghost stood beside him, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the men who had hunted them. The helicopter's downdraft whipped the snow into furious spirals. Blackwood's fury turned to disbelief, then despair. Finally, he let his pistol fall, the sound lost in the wind. Within minutes, agents swarmed the clearing, securing the men and dousing what was left of the fire. Jack stumbled toward the nearest officer, his voice hoarse. "There's evidence, under the hearth, in the cellar." "We know," a tall man said, flashing an FBI badge. "Mark Jensen called it 0600 sharp. He told us everything." He extended a gloved hand. "Agent Thompson, you've had quite a night, Mr. Callahan." Jack took the handshake weakly, his fingers shaking. "You have no idea." Thompson gave a small nod. "Actually, I think we do." He looked toward the burned cabin. "We'll dig up the rest. Thanks to you and your partner here, we've got what we need." Ghost leaned against Jack's leg, the silver of his fur glinting in the dawn light. For the first time in days, Jack let himself breathe. The storm was finally over. And as the helicopters lifted, carrying the last of the darkness away, he looked back at the charred remains of the cabin, the place that had nearly killed him, but had also given him back something he thought he'd lost: purpose. He rested a hand on Ghost's head and whispered, "We did it, boy." The dog wagged his tail once, steady and sure, as the first rays of sunrise touched the frozen world.